Something astonishing happened during Europe's so-called Dark Ages. While entire libraries vanished, one empire quietly preserved and expanded a treasury of ideas that would one day jumpstart the Renaissance. This story isn't the usual classroom lesson, and some parts may catch you off guard. We start with an admission. The phrase, "How Islam saved Western civilization," might feel contradictory. Dr. Roy Casagranda actually planted that contradiction on purpose. On the one hand, it sounds as though a separate force swooped in to rescue a fading heritage. On the other hand, what if that force was never separate at all? Tonight, we'll examine major examples of how Muslim scholars, libraries, and inventions bridge the gap between Rome's fading power and Europe's intellectual revival. By the end, you might question the entire East versus West narrative you thought was true. Throughout medieval Europe, events were unfolding that aren't always covered in the average Western civ class. Rulers rose and fell, religious movements soared, and grand institutions either flourished or faced ruin. Yet outside Europe, in places such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba, thriving intellectual hubs compiled and translated works from Greece, Rome, Persia, and beyond. These translations didn't stop at mere preservation. New ideas and layers of insight were added in mathematics, optics, physics, and theology. The synergy was powerful and far-reaching. Dr. Casagranda deliberately placed a contradictory phrase in the title. Why? Because he wanted everyone to realize that many lines drawn between East and West are artificial. They don't necessarily reflect the way cultures organically grow, blend, and influence one another. On one level, Islam didn't save an external civilization. It nurtured ideas within its own sphere, which was already part of a broader tapestry we call Western civilization. Yet on another level, from a strictly European viewpoint, it can appear as though an external culture swooped in to preserve fragile remnants of ancient Greece and Rome. Whether you consider it saving or continuing, the pivotal takeaway is that the medieval Islamic world actively carried forward the knowledge base that Europe had in many places allowed to dim. So is it fair to say Islam saved Western civilization, or is it more accurate to say Islam was and remains an integral component of the very heritage we label Western? We'll move through 5 main sections, tracing the moment Rome fell and why that date is so misleading. A look at libraries, from the Great Library of Alexandria to Gundeshapur and beyond. Translation and transmission, the hidden networks that moved Greek, Roman, Persian, Indian, and Chinese knowledge across vast empires. Key individuals and scholars, from Al-Khwarizmi's algebraic innovations to Ibn al-Haytham's optics. The Renaissance and aftermath, how this stored knowledge fueled Europe's eventual rise. Stay until the end for a challenge that may alter how you look at both modern life and historical identities. The year 476 CE often marks the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. In typical history books, we hear about Emperor Romulus Augustulus stepping down or being deposed, and how barbarians then toppled the last vestiges of Roman order in Europe. Yet that date fails to recognize that an Eastern Roman Empire centered in Constantinople continued, sometimes thriving, for another 1,000 years. That branch, which historians call the Byzantine Empire, was very much Roman from its own viewpoint. Same laws, same governance structures, same sense of continuity. So in any real sense, Rome didn't truly vanish in 476. Furthermore, among historians, there's a deeper conversation about whether that date was more symbolic than actual. Empires don't collapse the same day a particular figurehead is removed. Often, they wither gradually, with local governance, trade routes, and culture persisting in some form well beyond the dramatic headlines of a single dethroned ruler. While the fall of Rome conjures images of chaos, the Eastern Roman Empire maintained formidable armies, advanced building projects, and a robust legal framework. Emperors such as Justinian built grand churches, codified Roman law, and worked to reclaim lost provinces. These efforts carried forth Roman identity. Meanwhile, in the Persian Empire, parallel developments took place. Persian rulers clashed with the Eastern Romans for centuries, leading to alliances, betrayals, and negotiations that redefined the borders of the Mediterranean world. What's crucial is that both the Eastern Roman Empire and the Persian Empire housed libraries, schools, and thriving cities. Christian conversions in the East eventually led to tensions with classical pagan learning, culminating in episodes where ancient texts were destroyed or hidden away. Yet, pockets of scholarship remained, especially in places removed from immediate conflict. Our mainstream lessons often skip quickly from the fall of Rome around 476 to the Middle Ages, with minimal mention of how knowledge survived in places that still called themselves Roman. It's as though large parts of West Asia or North Africa simply stopped existing in historical memory once barbarian kingdoms sprang up in Europe. In truth, the Roman East left an imprint on the culture of the entire region, sustaining roads, architecture, art, and administrative systems. This living legacy gave the Islamic conquests a sturdy foundation to build upon, turning an unlikely coalition of desert tribes into a world-shaping empire in a matter of decades. Surprised to learn Rome didn't vanish in 476? That's only the start. If this challenged your assumptions, tap the thumbs up so these insights reach more people. Up next, unexpected safe havens for lost knowledge. Legends speak of the Great Library of Alexandria, a repository so vast that it supposedly contained up to 1 million texts. Later, historians debate the exact number. Some say it was closer to a few 100,000. Others maintain it could have been near 700,000. Regardless of the precise figure, it was a beacon of scholarship. Yet in 391 CE, conflicts tied to religious upheaval led to a purge, with Christian mobs clashing against pagan enclaves. One disastrous outcome involved the library's destruction. The capital of advanced knowledge gone, but gone is never absolute. People who valued those manuscripts scattered. Some took what they could carry into private collections or remote libraries. Over centuries, these relics found new homes in monastic centers, in hidden spaces, and importantly, in the realm of Persian scholars who saw immense value in Greek and Roman thought. Persian rulers, particularly under Shapur Burfan in the 3rd century and later during the reign of Khosrow I, recognized that collecting texts from Byzantium, India, and even further east would empower the empire. The Academy of Gundashapur, situated in what is now southwestern Iran, blossomed into a center of translation, medicine, and philosophy. When Roman refugees fled persecution or war, they found that the Persian Empire, while hostile on the battlefield, had room for scholars. Fascinatingly, Gundashapur wasn't just about Greek or Roman works. Persian emperors employed Nestorian Christian physicians and mathematicians, as well as Jewish scholars, to produce original research and compile a combined worldview. Elements of Indian mathematics and Chinese astronomy also entered these libraries, forming a mosaic of knowledge unprecedented in earlier centuries. As Rome adopted Christianity more fully, culminating in Theodosius I declaring Christianity the empire's official faith, attitudes hardened. Leaders considered pagan works subversive or demonic, Many classical texts were seen as philosophical threats to Christian orthodoxy. Public acceptance of mathematics or astronomy varied over time, depending on whether they seemed to clash with Scripture. This shift resulted in a precarious environment for scholars who prized the old ways. In some cities, Christian bishops or mobs forcibly closed philosophical academies or burned manuscripts, yet not all Christians favored destruction. Some believed in preserving classical learning to understand the natural world God had created. There were quiet movements to save and interpret ancient knowledge. These internal tensions created a push and pull dynamic that oscillated for centuries. During the early 7th century, Muslim armies took on both the Roman, Byzantine, and Persian, Sasanian empires. By the mid-700s, they controlled a vast swath of territory spanning from the Indus River to parts of Spain. The initial conquests weren't solely about subjugating populations. Administrative models from Persia and the Byzantine provinces were adopted, letting local bureaucrats keep the wheels turning. Amid this, great libraries like Gundashapur fell into Muslim hands. Instead of destroying them, many caliphs funded translations, expansions, and even original research that merged Greek, Persian, and other influences into Arabic. Who knew precious manuscripts could outlast riots and destruction? The next section uncovers how they spread across continents. Show your support with a quick thumbs up and brace yourself for a surprising chain of events. Individuals such as Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Nestorian Christian who mastered Greek, Syriac, and Arabic. He spearheaded projects to translate Aristotle, Plato, Galen, and Hippocrates. In many cases, these translators produced versions with commentary, clarifying and expanding upon the original text. Thus, Europe received not just a Greek classic, but an enriched adaptation full of fresh interpretations. This was more than mechanical copying. They often encountered archaic idioms or outdated scientific assumptions. Translators would footnote text or incorporate new insights from Persian or Indian thought. The result was a dynamic body of scholarship that soared above what the Romans or Greeks might have recognized. One might wonder how this material found its way back west. After all, Europe looked suspiciously at the Saracens, or Moors, or Turks, depending on the group encountered. The surprising link: Spain, known as Al-Andalus under Muslim governance for centuries, and Sicily, which also had an extended period of Islamic rule. These territories formed cultural crossroads. Monks on the Christian side eventually realized the texts in Arabic were precisely the classical works their own scholars had once revered, yet with new expansions. Over time, clandestine or semi-official translation projects popped up, particularly around the 10th to 13th centuries. Figures such as Gerard of Cremona and Constantine the African emerged as key intermediaries. Sometimes they worked in Christian monasteries, sometimes in more open schools. They carefully rendered Arabic commentary and texts into Latin. Critics from conservative Christian circles condemned this Islamic infiltration, fearing heresy. Yet the thirst for advanced knowledge overrode such fears, especially when the results were practically beneficial, like better medical treatments or improved architectural methods. It's true that for decades, many Europeans tried to hide their sources. A text might be published without credit to the Arabic scholar who refined the geometry or advanced the optics. New ideas credited to a Western thinker often turned out to be relabeled scholarship from centuries-old Persian or Arab sources. Over time, this erasure diminished as Renaissance minds openly cited classical Greek authors. Only more specialized scholars realized that many of these Greek works had arrived in thoroughly Arabic garments. This ongoing interplay shapes a central question: can we cleanly separate Western from Islamic tradition when so many pivotal treatises came to medieval Europe through Arabic translations, with commentaries that refined the content? Few innovations affect daily life, more than algebra. Our entire financial system, engineering feats, computer science, and even search engine algorithms rely on it. The term algorithm itself commemorates Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, an astronomer, mathematician, and geographer of the 9th century. His major work on algebra offered a systematic method for solving equations, an approach so groundbreaking that it laid the bedrock for modern mathematics. Beyond establishing algebra, Al-Khwarizmi's writings on geography revised Ptolemy's flawed calculations. He introduced more accurate maps, acknowledging the circumferences of Earth and distances between major cities with remarkable precision for the time. Latin translations of his name spawned algorismus, later algorithm, and algebra from al-Jabr. Ibn al-Haytham, often called al-Hazan in the West, produced seminal work in the field of optics around the turn of the 11th century. He systematically used experimentation to test hypotheses about how light travels, how reflection and refraction operate, and how vision occurs in the human eye. Earlier Greek theories posited that the eye emitted rays. Ibn al-Haytham overturned that assumption by proving light enters the eye from external sources. Crucially, he established principles of the scientific method, emphasizing observation, hypothesis testing, and the verification of results. Galileo and Bacon later explored these same ideas, yet Ibn al-Haytham had laid out much of the groundwork centuries earlier. In the West, many know Ibn Sina by the Latinized name Avicenna. Living around 980–1037 CE, he wrote nearly 450 works on a range of topics including philosophy, medicine, and theology. His most famous medical text, the Canon of Medicine, dominated European medical curricula into the 17th century. It classified diseases, mapped out treatments, and introduced the idea that airborne and waterborne contagions spread certain illnesses. This wasn't mere guesswork. Avicenna methodically observed, recorded outcomes, and revised his conclusions based on evidence. The canon's influence stretched across continents, guiding medical practices in Europe and the Middle East. Hospitals in the Islamic world at the time were not just care facilities. They became teaching centers, staffed by professionals who used Avicenna's systematic approach. It's no exaggeration to say this text shaped modern clinical methods. Philosophical debates were also ignited by scholars such as Al-Farabi, known for his expansions on Aristotle's logic and metaphysics, and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who famously defended the compatibility of faith and reason. Averroes' commentaries on Aristotle were highly prized in Latin Christendom. Thomas Aquinas, one of medieval Europe's greatest theologians, quoted Ibn Rushd extensively, even while disagreeing with some interpretations. These crossovers highlight an ongoing dialogue. Theology, ethics, and politics were debated in a multicultural mosaic. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim philosophers built on each other's work, forging frameworks that eventually shaped European scholasticism. An essential hallmark of the medieval Islamic world was the emphasis on systematic experimentation. Algebra, optics, and medical protocols all benefited from a culture that valued repeated tests and logical conclusions. This was not universal in medieval Europe at the time, where knowledge often cloaked itself in religious dogma or old authoritative texts. The shift toward experimental science in Europe can be partially traced back to channels introduced through Arabic scholarship. From algebra to optics, these innovations changed far more than textbooks. Give a thumbs up if you believe such pioneers deserve recognition. Next, see how their work laid the groundwork for Europe's grand revival. People often frame the Renaissance as a spontaneous rebirth of classical culture in 14th century Europe, as though the ancients had been resurrected from oblivion. In reality, these texts had never fully disappeared. They thrived in Arabic translations and in select pockets of monastic scholarship. The Crusades, ironically, were another conduit. Contact with the Islamic world acquainted Europeans with advanced learning and goods. Returning knights or merchants would speak of a level of civilization in the Levant that surprised many back home. Cities such as Florence and Venice gradually became hubs where translations, some direct from Greek originals, others from Arabic, fueled philosophical and artistic revolutions. Patrons like the Medici family poured money into recovering antiquities. Scholars scoured monastic libraries and mercantile routes to access Arabic manuscripts. The more texts surfaced, the more intellectual. Europe realized how much had been missing. Not everyone welcomed the flood of ancient or Arabic ideas. Certain church authorities worried that Aristotelian logic could sow doubt about Christian doctrines. Others deemed these materials essential for understanding the natural world and defending faith against heresy. This internal tug-of-war resulted in condemnation for some scholars, while others rose to prominence as indispensable teachers. Perhaps the most iconic struggle, the cases of Copernicus and later Galileo. Their astronomical assertions challenged prevailing Earth-centered views. Yet earlier astronomers in the Islamic world, such as Al-Tusi, had already suggested or proven certain planetary movements that echoed some of Copernicus's claims. The real rift, then, wasn't new knowledge itself, but how that knowledge upset entrenched religious interpretations. With the introduction of the printing press in Europe, around the mid-15th century, the reproduction of texts soared. Works that once circulated in guarded manuscripts could be printed en masse. This jump in accessibility meant that knowledge previously hoarded by small circles of elites, be they in monasteries, universities, or the House of Wisdom, could spread to an emerging educated class. Texts derived from translations of Arabic versions of ancient Greek sources were published alongside new European works, fueling a chain reaction of scientific progress. Even though the Middle East and North Africa took different historical trajectories in later centuries, including episodes of invasion and colonization, the knowledge pipeline had long since infused Europe's intellectual bloodstream. Was the Renaissance really a sudden bloom or something older reborn? If you sense a bigger picture here, tap the thumbs up. Onward to see how ideas crossed borders in ways rarely discussed. One of the most striking examples of cultural handover is found in Sicily, initially under Byzantine influence, then briefly in the hands of the Aghlabids and later Fatimids. The island flourished as a cultural melting pot. When Norman adventurers conquered Sicily, they encountered a population that spoke Arabic, followed Islamic legal structures, and had architectural feats reminiscent of North Africa. Rather than eradicating these elements, some Norman rulers integrated them. This fusion is evident in buildings such as the Cappella Palatina in Palermo, which features Arabic inscription alongside Christian iconography. Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, similarly mirrored these dynamics. The city of Cordoba dazzled visitors with streetlights, running water, and a society that advanced scholarship, commerce, and the arts. Christian travelers from Northern Europe were astounded by the libraries and the presence of women as well as men in academic circles. Later, as Castile, Aragon, and Portugal reconquered lands, the translation wave gained momentum, bridging European knowledge with what had been cultivated under Islamic rule, often portrayed purely as religious. Wars. The Crusades inadvertently contributed to cultural and intellectual cross-fertilization. Though the Crusaders were intent on conquering or defending holy sites, they also encountered advanced fortifications, medical practices, and navigational knowledge. Some knights returned with not just spoils of war, but with new awareness, exotic spices, architectural techniques, and an appreciation for more sophisticated forms of scholarship. European nobility saw how Islamic polities governed multi-ethnic and multi-religious domains. While tolerance varied widely in Islamic lands, there were often examples of legal structures that, at minimum, recognized Jewish and Christian communities as people of the book, giving them a measure of self-governance in exchange for taxes. In an era when religious uniformity in Europe was heavily enforced, this approach broadened the conversation on governance and citizenship. Trade routes that spanned the Mediterranean, Red Sea, and Indian Ocean were vital conduits for knowledge. Merchants needed reliable calculations for distance, currency exchange, and shipping logistics. Innovations in geometry, algebra, and astronomy found real-world applications in navigation and cartography. Texts discussing these subjects gained value, encouraging their copying and translation, even in purely commercial hubs. Venice, Genoa, and Pisa rose as maritime powers, forging commercial treaties with Egyptian and Levantine ports. Genoese or Venetian traders who lived for extended periods in places like Alexandria or Tripoli of the Levant often learned local languages out of necessity. Over time, they encountered manuscripts, heard about scientific breakthroughs, and sometimes brought back treatises that local scholars in Europe would examine. This synergy reinforced how knowledge and commerce intertwined. Cities like Sicily and Cordoba were just the tip of the iceberg. One final segment pulls everything together, and you won't want to miss it. Press thumbs up now, then prepare for the closing perspective. So did Islam save Western civilization? Perhaps it's more accurate to say that the Islamic world acted as a steward for a collective intellectual heritage. Ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian texts survived and were significantly enriched in Arabic. The assimilation of these texts into Europe from the 10th century onward advanced fields such as medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, catalyzing a cultural revolution. On a deeper level, it challenges the notion that Western and Eastern societies lived in two separate bubbles. Instead, they were overlapping spheres, constantly trading goods, ideas, and populations. The lines we draw on maps can't fully capture the flows of knowledge that define entire eras. When Dr. Roy Casagranda speaks of this contradiction, he's shining a spotlight on the ongoing tension between the labels we adopt versus the messy, brilliant reality of our shared human story. If the classical era provided seeds of wisdom, then the Islamic Golden Age tended those seeds, ensuring they didn't wither when Europe neglected its own heritage. Eventually, those seeds were replanted back in European soil, where they blossomed into the Renaissance and beyond. Here's one step you can take right now. Pick a standard historical achievement, perhaps the invention of the algebraic equation, a key medical breakthrough, or an astronomical model. Seek out the earliest sources behind it. Trace each translator, each scholar, each empire that nurtured this piece of knowledge. Once you do, share that background with a friend or colleague. You'll spark conversations that upend the simplistic East versus West narrative. All it takes is that first move, scanning the origins of the knowledge we often take for granted. Do that and help rewrite a story that belongs to all of us, no matter which label we carry. Because if we grasp how entwined our roots really are, it might just open us to new levels of respect and cooperation in the present. Thank you for being part of this enlightening journey. Remember, every shift in perspective sparks a ripple of change. Together, we challenge the boundaries of our understanding and shape a future based on true knowledge. If you believe in the power of questioning and expanding horizons, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join this mission. May wisdom guide us all on the path of enlightenment, and may our pursuit of truth never falter. Amen. For 11 seconds, thank you for standing with us and honoring this legacy. Knowledge unites, sparks compassion, and ignites purpose. May we remain steadfast in seeking truth, bridging hearts, and uplifting our shared heritage. Amin.